Hello and welcome to Sass Bites. This is episode 45. We are your weekly bite of Sass during your lunch break. My name is Micah. You can follow me down there on Twitter, as well as you can follow Sass Bites at Sass Bites. You can catch our old episodes, all 44 of them, at youtube.com/sassbites and catch up on all things sassy. So last week we started out with a quick introduction to the new things coming out in Sass 3.4. I gotten a chance to jump into like the pre-release of this. Actually, I showed how to build your own gem and install the gem and those kind of things. Since then, the first alpha or beta, I don't know what it's called, but the first release has actually come out. So if you install gem install sass -- pre, you actually get the new version through the 3.4.0 whatever alpha 1 release. So now that it's out there in the wild, you can definitely play with it a lot easier. And what I want to do today is show off a little bit more about what you can do with it. Last week we showed just some of the simple like appending and combining functions that 3.4 offered. And this week I want to dive into some more real concrete examples of really what this now allows us to do that we weren't able to do before. It at least changes the way that I'm able to write my Sass, and that's pretty exciting. I'm going to be looking at 3 different gists today from Sassmeister, and I've got this queued up, and I'm going to tweet those out as we speak. So if you're not following Sass Bites, you should, because you can then get a link to all 3 of these gists that I'm doing. I'll start off with the first one and work my way on down, and we'll go from there. So that tweet is out, and let me go ahead and screen share so we can start taking a look at them. If I can remember which... There's the window. Cool. All right, there's Twitter. All right, so the first one we want to take a look at is this actually something I wrote in a blog article, just went out today on the Phase 2 website. So if you got a chance to read that, it should look very familiar. But this is the big problem, and I don't even have that example. Yeah, so the problem is that sometimes you'll have like in this case, we've got tabs, we've got individual tab, and then we have the link inside. So you're thinking like UL, LI. Oh, I can look at the screen. All right, so the tabs would be like the UL, the tab would be the LI, and the tab link would be the anchor tag, something like that. And what we want to do is we want to be able to change the tab and the tab link whenever you hover over the tab. And this is pretty common because I'll have like the background colors on the tab itself, but then the tab link, I want to change the color on, you know, the actual text color and those kind of things. And typically I wasn't able to do that because you can't have this internal context in using the ampersand. So you couldn't say like tab link and then ampersand hover and then tab link again or something like that. It doesn't work. So using selector-replace, what we're able to do is create a nice little function like this. And what this function does is it allows us to pass in our target and basically our new context. And so let's take a look at this mixin at what it does, because it's a pretty simple mixin. It's really just kind of a wrapper for our selector-replace. So selector-replace takes 3 parameters. The first one is the actual selector that you're going to be manipulating. And in this case, we're passing in the ampersand, which is going to be tabs, actually, let's see. Yeah, tabs, tab link, like that. So, yeah, those are the 3 things that are going to be coming in, tabs, tab link. And we're going to be removing the old, or we're going to be finding the old context and replacing it with the new context. So that's what's happening. Let's look at what those are. So the old context being just .tab, the new context being .tab hover. And this is really great. So this means we can have our tab, and then we can just define what it looks like with the hover state. And then we can have our tab link, talk about its base state, and then also have a context of when the tab is actually tab hover. So if I don't want that to be tab hover, maybe we're using some JavaScript to actually just do like tab active or something like that. You can see that that changes to tab active. So we've got our tab link is color white, and our tab active is red. So this is a great way to make a really simple function that wraps this a little uglier function in something that's a little more usable. Because for one, we then are able to assume. We're able to assume our selector is we're just going to inherit from the ampersand. We're not going to pass in something custom into there. And we're also going to assume at root, which we need because we don't want to have it inside of the current context. We want it at the root context. Because without that, you can see what happens is it's going to duplicate our tab active inside of our current context. So that's the reason we need for that. As well as you don't have to worry about using extrapolation here to pull that out into an actual selector and all that kind of stuff. So again, much cleaner, much nicer. All right, this is step one. The next step is, well, this is nice because I can style tab hover or tab active, but I can't style both of them. What if, and this is pretty common, what if your hover state looks exactly like your active state? So in other words, active, like if that's the page that you're on in your navigation, it lights up. And then when you hover, it's the exact same style. Normally we would do this. We would do ampersand hover and then ampersand active. Oops, like this, active, can't type. And that would work perfectly for us over here once it decides to go. Oh, there we go. All right. So it would have tab hover and tab active, but we don't have a way to do that with our tab link. We haven't created a mixin that allows for multiple inputs. Because if we add more inputs in, it's just this mixin only knows what to do with 2 inputs. So second item on our list is doing exactly that. So we're just going to update this mixin so it can accept multiple inputs. And we do that on a mixin. This is, I guess, mixin theory today. We do that by putting these 3 little dots after the last parameter in the mixin. Now it's got to be the last one because what it's going to allow us to do is to send either 2 parameters in if we want to, or to send as many parameters as we want, and then the last ones all being grouped together in this last in this parameter here. So basically what we're going to do is the exact same thing with the old context, and then we're going to be using context here, and I'll explain that in a second. And we're going to be doing the exact same thing. So we're going to, if we don't do anything different, we're still going to send in tab hover, and we still get tab hover on the right. Everything's great. But if we send in multiple, what we're doing is we're actually iterating over that list of new contexts. You can see I call it plural here, and actually, and I could even just do this. There's no reason to. I kind of like doing plural singular. So we pass in contexts, and that could be 1. And if it's 1, that's fine. We iterate over 1 of them. And that 1 is passed through as context, and it works fine. But if we want to pass in multiple, and again, we need to do .tab because we need to know what's being replaced. So now we're sending in a list of a list that contains .tab hover and .tab active. And so that's going to iterate through those 2. So we're going to go through this twice. And it's going to print it out once with .hover, boom, and another time with .active. Really handy because oftentimes I find myself doing that where you have the same style that's going to be applied over multiple contexts. You get really crazy and go in here with .tab, and we're going to do a data state is equal to active because we're using some data attributes too. And I should probably close this. There we go. And as you can see, we can do that as well. So, and I think I did all that right. So if we need it, we can pass in as many as we want into that mixin. It's going to iterate through all of those and apply all those different contexts to our tab link. Super sweet. We just saved a bunch of code. We made things a lot less error prone and a lot easier to change in the future. All right. So the next thing someone's going to tell me is that, all right, you've got this kind of them-ish thing going with tabs, tab-link. There's really no reason for tab-link to be inside of .tab. It's pretty obvious. I mean, it's a tab link, so why not have tab and tab link on the same level of indenting or the same level of nesting? Well, in this case, we can't really do that because we are applying we're applying that context by finding .tab inside of our list of selectors. So that .tab has to be in there for us to be able to grab and add that additional context to, or to swap that context out. It's kind of a find and replace kind of thing. So if we can't find it, we can't replace it. So let's try a different approach, and that's what we're going to look at with our third and final mix in here. And this is going to be insert context. I haven't figured out, I don't know if well, you could probably make this do multiples, but at this point I'm just going to have this do a single one because we have to figure out some before and after kind of stuff. So let's look at it real quick because it's a little bit different. I'm going to call this one insert context. To kind of lay the groundwork, I've got .tabs, I've got a tab, and then I've got a tab link, and those are all at that tabs level. So this keeps our selector list smaller. It keeps us from getting that inception rule and those kind of things. And just as you can see over here, tabs tab and tabs tab link. We only have 2 selectors instead of 3, which is always a good thing. Performance and file size, specificity, and all those kind of things. But it means we can't go and find tabs and add tab hover to it. It means what we need to do is we need to insert a context. Insert a context either before something or after something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a context after tabs, but obviously before tab link. So it's going to go between the 2. If you had multiple, if you had 4, you need to know which one you do after or before. In this case, before tab link or after tabs, obviously the same thing, but when you have a longer selector, it certainly does matter. All right, so insert context. We're going to insert context after tabs, and I guess I can maybe change the order to make that a little more obvious, but oh well. After tabs, and the context we're going to add is this entire string of tab hover, because that's what we want to get out in the end here, is tabs, tab hover, tab link. So we've got our tabs, tab link, but when the tab is hovered, the color is going to be red. So that's what we're shooting for. And let's see how this mixin actually accomplishes that. And it's kind of neat because we actually get to use a couple of the these new functions that we have. So the first thing you see is what we can do is with that order. The reason I put it at the end is because I wanted to make that an optional one. So I've got it set as default to before. So if you don't pass a parameter in, it's going to just assume that you want to put the context before whatever that target is. So target context. I'm wrapping this in some if statements so I can do that before or after. And because of that, I actually need to specify my my variable first, which is probably good practice anyway. So I'm going to have this new context we're going to need to basically piece together before we insert it in. So if the order is before, which is basically the default behavior, then our new context is going to be, and again, we're going to use this selector nest. And as I mentioned last week, and I mentioned in my blog article, selector nest doesn't do anything special or new, but it does mean it can be done in a function without having to basically concoct it manually. Because I could have done this, and I should have had an example. I can concoct this manually by actually recreating this nest and grabbing that new context. But that's really annoying because I can't. It's hard to assign to a variable, and it's not programmatic. It's a lot easier to be able to use this function rather than writing it out by hand. So selector nest is going to be, we're going to nest these two. So context with target nested inside of it. So since this is going to be before we have the context and the target. So otherwise, if we're not putting that before, we want to have target and then context after it. So this is where the context is going. Is it going before the target here, or is it going after the target like that? All right. So now that we have our new context combined, and actually let me explain what this would be. So since we're using after, our target is tabs. So we're going to have .tabs, and then we're going to nest inside that .tab hover. So that's what we're going to have. We're going to have .tabs, .tab hover, and that's exactly what we get here. Just a reminder of what nest versus append does. Append actually combines them together. So .tabs, .tab hover, it's obviously not what we want to do because that's not going to give us what we need. So nest, we'll put that space between them, actually nest them like just if you were nesting them in your Sass. All right, so now that we have our new context, Let's create a new selector since I'm being a little more breaking things out. Let's create our new selector, which is selector-replace. Again, we're going to grab our ampersand, which is just whatever our current context is, which is tabs, tab link. And then we're going to find our target, which is, again, is tabs in this case, because that's what we're going to put stuff after. And then we're going to replace. So the thing is with replace, we have to replace that original with this new context, and that's why we had to put target back in. So we find tabs and we replace it with tabs tab hover, and that's how we're going to get our final product. So tabs.tab hover. So again, if I want to do tabs.active like that, it would combine the two together and then replace tabs with tabs tab active. There it goes. Thank you very much. So that's another approach we can do. One thing to note with this, and this was kind of what looked like a bug at first, but it's actually not a bug. It's the way that this function works, and it's a good kind of reminder that what we're doing, we're not doing mere string replacement. If you want to do mere string replacement, you could actually just use some of the string functions and just go into the string and find a thing and replace it, which might actually be better, but long story. But the short of it is that we're actually using the same the same process that is used when extending. And if you've ever done extends with, especially complex extends, you know that Sass is a little it's overly cautious. It wants to make sure that it knows what your intention is, because sometimes it's not always clear. And what that means is, say I want to use the before, and I want to have tab link, and I want to use before. So this is going to basically combine tab link and tab active, and replace tab link with that. So what you see as a result is tabs, tab active, tab link. This is good. This is what we're expecting. But it also creates tab.active.tabs tab link. And as I said, we're not doing a complete string replacement. We're actually using the extending algorithms to basically extend, just like when we use an add extend. So what this gives us is Sass needs to just be really gracious about, like, I don't know exactly what you mean here when you're extending, so I'm going to give you both of them. That's basically what they're doing. I don't personally like it. I might try and refactor this with more of a string, with like actual string replacement, so that I don't have this extra like unexpected stuff. But if you're using really modular component-based styles, this isn't going to affect anything, because you're never going to have tabs inside of a .tab active unless you have something that nests, which that's, I guess, can be where the problem comes up. But anyway, that's kind of just one of the caveats there, and probably one of the reasons I would stick with more of the replacement method, so that you can just, the replacement method being this original context. Actually, I'd like, obviously, this one the best. I would probably use this and just make sure that context is there, so you know you can flip it out with the other context. But this gives you an example of how you can put a lot of these together using Selector Nest to combine and create these new selectors, and then replacing them with all the different functions. So that is just probably, I'm sure that's the tip of the iceberg. That's the first example that came to my mind as to what you can use this for. And so please feel free. I'm going to be using this in every single project you ever come across. So if you've ever seen include context in something I've written, know that you're going to be able to find this mix in there. So so that's Sass 3.4. There are a few other comparative functions, and if I can find some good examples, I might try and put those in next week. They're kind of minor. If you're doing some large framework building, there's some ways basically to compare two selectors and see what's common, or to see if they are common, and it's some crazy like comparative math stuff that I know I wouldn't use for just basic styling. So I'm not going to jump into too much. I think this is really where the meat of it comes in. Being able to do selector replace. Oh, and also to mention, there's also a selector extend, and let me do that, extend, which actually works identical. This works. I should probably test it. I'm not going to get into that then. Selector replace and selector extend. Let me make sure that's even the right word. selector append, yeah, selector extend, replace extend, yeah. It works pretty much exactly like the replace. The difference being when you replace, you remove the old one and put the new one in. With extend, you're going to get both of them. So when you're working inside of a nest, it probably doesn't matter because you already have the original. But when you're working within a framework and you're trying to build out these all these selectors, you might use selector extend, this function here, instead of append, or sorry, instead of replace, if you need to retain that original one. So anyway, that is what I wanted to show off for today. Next week, I don't know yet. We'll figure out what we need to do. But Sass 3.4 alpha is out. There might be some revisions that come down the pike. Keep an eye out for it before 3.4 goes gold, but I'm sure that should be pretty quick. They're moving at a pretty good pace, and I'm really curious to see what Sass 3.5 is going to bring, and I'll certainly be covering that as those changes come down too. So hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to give me a tweet if you have any questions about these, about how to use them, or maybe how to make them fit any other needs, because I'd be kind of curious what everyone else needs and how else you use them. So I would love to hear from you if you have any thoughts or observations. Until then, see you next week. See ya.